anyways, and so that's pretty much what we've had to do. And there's some kind of trial and error things because we are very concerned about our student safety and our network security as well. But I want to say for the most part, the easiest thing is if you go to the Generation Esports, there's a link there for support, IT support, and all of the URLs are spelled out right there. And that information you can just hand over to your IT department and they can whitelist and allow those things either in the Barracuda, the Cisco Firewall, or Active Directory, or whatever it is.
As soon as you said that, Pat, I saw Michael Watson. He's going to put all of those in the chat. I can already tell is what what I think he's going to do. Michael, anything to add to that? You know, on our end that helps schools.
Yeah, like Pat referred to, I just put it in the chat. That is our list of all the ports and services that you would need to whitelist for any of the games that we run in the High School Esports League, Youth Winter Circle, or the Middle School Esports League. And so basically at the top of that list is any sites that we use, like our support site. I know Jim had some specific trouble with our Zendesk support chat, not like connecting with him. So we've tried to give you everything that you could possibly need to unlock for our services, but then for any games as well. So some games have, and I'm sure some of you know this and some of you don't, if you're playing games on PC, some of them have a launcher as well. So for example, like Rocket League launches from the Epic Game Launcher. So you have to whitelist the launcher and the game itself. So it's a pretty exhaustive list. We try to, like every summer, make sure all that stuff is up to date. We also have whitelisting for like video game consoles as well. So that's a good place to start. But as the other three gentlemen have already said, every school's sort of like ecosystem and solutions are different. These ports and services to open are just like what you will have to unlock eventually. How you do that is a little bit different every time. We have an article that's kind of just like a baseline article that says common esports networking solutions that I'll put in the chat as well. But again, this is like it's like an overview. We basically give you a few different like options that a lot of different districts tend to take. And those could be either creating a demilitarized zone that you turn on just sometimes for your students to like log in after school, to have a virtual LAN or a VLAN that maybe turns on at a certain time for your school, or to just specifically set up filters for certain content, but that could get really complex really fast. I'm not an expert in that. The person who wrote that is more of an expert than I am, but it is definitely a place to get started if you're just trying to wrap your head around like really like high level solutions for this. So I just put that in the chat as well.
Okay, we have go ahead.
I was just gonna say, during our initial design phase, we talked about and thought about whether I was put these different labs on different VLANs. Didn't do initially. We've come up with a problem potentially with Minecraft that will help if they are on their own VLAN. When Jim trying to get all 20 kids into the same world, it doesn't always work nicely. So we're going to try to segment that traffic off and see if that does anything.
And there's a question, and I'm not sure about this. Olivia asked, do any of you run esports in elementary schools? I teach 4 to 11-year-olds, and I would love to run esports for the 10 to 11-year-olds. Pat?
Yeah, so at my school, we're pre-K through 8th grade. And in our state, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders are considered middle schoolers. Right now, to my understanding, Generation Esports has esport leagues and tournaments for middle schoolers. And so since we have esports going on for our middle schoolers, we are also talking about allowing the younger grades to participate. They won't participate in the tournament play, but they can certainly be part of the clubs, the teams. They're like STEM clubs. We even have something called 21st Century, which is like an after school STEM type club that's open to elementary school. So although this is our first year doing it, but we're already talking about that, and actually had a conversation with our principal today about looking and recruiting prodigies, young students that are already pretty good athletes that are in the lower elementary levels. So yes, we're definitely wanting to do that.
And she's following up, Pat, by asking, any recommendations of games?
So right now we're going with just what the next generation esports games, what they have, because that's where the competitive play is going to be. And so right now, to my understanding, they have Minecraft, Brawlhalla, Rocket League, and then there's another one, a chess, e-chess. And next semester they're going to allow Mario Kart and Smash Brothers. So those are the 6 games. Right now we only have experience with Rocket League. Although we have downloaded some of the other games, we chose not to enter any teams into competitive play. So this is fairly new to us. So those were the 6 pieces of software that we're choosing to use right now. We'd probably be open to others as they come up.
And Julie, Maverick George is also on here. Thank you, Julie, I know Fresno has a lot of their elementary schools and middle schools that are on here. And so Julie, thank you for offering yourself as a resource also. We have another question that says, we would be looking at starting Minecraft in our middle schools. When it comes to Minecraft Java accounts in the Generation Esports programs, would you have any recommendations on how to manage accounts?
I'm not sure if any of the rest of you that are panelists on here run Minecraft, so I'll jump in first. And if you have a more practical solution than this, please feel free to do so, Jim, Kyle, or Pat. But what we suggest is Minecraft Java. The way it works is it specifically has to be Minecraft Java edition for competition. So there's basically 3 versions of Minecraft that schools can get a hold of. There's Bedrock edition, which started as the console edition, and now it's on PC as well. Java edition, and then Minecraft for Education. And only Minecraft Java edition works with our competitions because technically, any sort of like competition inside Minecraft is a mod for Minecraft or a modification of it. So Java edition is the only one that allows that. I'm getting into the technical weeds there a little bit. But if you purchase Minecraft at all on a PC, you get access to both Bedrock and Java edition. So you don't have to worry about that. Just make sure you're running the right one. But when it comes to actually managing school accounts, this is getting into a bigger conversation that we had planned, but I'll go ahead and kind of start this conversation. We at Generation Esports always recommend that students use personal accounts for this. And I know that scares people, but the reason being is that account has to match their Generation Esports account. Like there's something called a game connection in order for them to be within the rules. And so it's always good for students to use a personal account unless, maybe they go to another school or if they go from, middle school to high school so that account follows them. And not just for Minecraft, but for any game, if they're using that personal account and they're thinking about maybe doing esports after high school, maybe in college or something like that, that account and all the records associated with that account can be considered like a portfolio almost that they can use to show like, look how good I am at this, look how much I've played this, look how much practice I have. But I know that scares schools sometimes. So there are schools that purchase like Microsoft accounts for their students and assign it to them. Just know to be within our rules that account has to be unique to that student. So you can't just have an account sitting on a computer and have student A use it and then they switch out and then student B uses it. It needs to be an account that is associated with that student. So what you could do is maybe associate it with that student's school login as well. So anytime they're logged in with their login email, that is the Minecraft account they're using as well. I'll let some other people jump in that have some practical experience with handling accounts, but that might be a good place to get started, at least.
I can jump in on this one too a little bit. As far as the Minecraft specific part goes, we don't. Our district does not own any Minecraft Java licenses. So everything that is on the competitive side, if you want to play competitively, would have to be provided by the family purchasing their own Minecraft Java license and then using it in the competitive circle. We do use Minecraft Education, but obviously that's not for the competitive. That's a different story. That's for in-class use, and the school district pays a licensing fee to Microsoft per student for that. And that pricing depends on how many seats you have and what relationship you have at Microsoft or the third-party vendor that you go through. For other games, it's a little more challenging because, as Mike was saying, you have 2 things. You have the competitive side and then the in-class side. that you might use if you're doing gaming concepts and kids have some time to be able to game and use other things. In my class, for example, I teach how to use OBS to record gameplay, and then we cut video clips with it, and we do all kinds of stuff. I may have students that come that don't have a particular game license, and that's really more at the middle school level than the high school level. So the way we've been doing it at the high school level, we pretty much have been leaving students to bring their own licenses. It's like, you know, bring whatever you want. If you're a Valorant player, you got to have a Riot tag. If you are a, you know, Rocket League player, you got to have an Epic Games account. But the middle school, we've been focusing primarily on Minecraft education, because that's where I think it's a little bit more problematic for students to come with their own licenses. And by the school providing it, I can guarantee that there's certain access that they have to different, you know, Minecraft activities, but knowing full well that that's not part of the competitive scene. They're really two different things, and that's how they have to be looked at: the in-school teaching gaming concept side, and then the competitive side, which every school would have to decide for themselves how they would want to handle it. But that's how we do it so far.
And that being said, I want to jump on for accounts, even though we have students use their own personal accounts. If they don't have one for a certain game, they're going to create one. We kind of recommend to use their school email, and we are a Google school, and their email is sandbox. So that opens a whole nother set of rules. You got to whitelist the different game engines, their email, to be able to let that code come through so they can actually finish creating their accounts. So that's just something else to remember and keep in your mind.
Okay, thank you for that. Keep the questions coming. As we wait for another one, if you want to go a certain direction, I am going to ask this. The question is, what do your computers look like? What type of computers do you have to play esports, to do esports in your schools? Kyle, want to start with that one?
Oh, that's a touchy subject in a sense, because I always like to get the best bang for the buck that I can afford. So like our Nexus Labs, those are high-end i9s with 3060 Ti graphics cards, you know, the top of the line stuff. You could probably have gotten away with an i7 and a 20x NVIDIA card, maybe even an i5, depending on the games you're playing. So I would say, depending on your budget, look at what you can afford to get. Because also, you're thinking about, like we said, these computers are used for our other classes, animation and video rendering and stuff, and that's where the horsepower will really get used. So having those i9 machines, I know they were the first year they used just AutoCAD in there, and the teacher's like, "Oh my God, what used to take 3 minutes to open this up took 2 seconds," and so he's like, "I don't want to go back to anything other than these now."
Right.
Yeah, if I could jump in on this one too. So I agree completely with what Kyle's saying. I think here's my take on it. When we were designing the Nexus and choosing what we were going to do, one of the biggest questions I think you have to ask is, what else do I want to do besides esports? That's really the key question. In our case, we didn't want to limit it to just an esports game lab. We wanted to make it so that if we wanted to teach high-end animation, really high-end animation using Maya software, for example, we wanted the horsepower to do it. Same thing with any other application. SolidWorks CAD is another one that's pretty hefty with the requirements that it needs. And so if you say to yourself, this is what I want the lab to do, look to try to get a little over what that top need is, so that you've got a little bit of buffer for the long-term life of the computer, and you're not limiting yourself to what you've spent on. If you go with something that's budget because it's what you can afford, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But just realize that that may also limit the long-term use of what else you can do with it. At our school, we are running esports classes during the school day, which obviously require gaming horsepower, but we also run animation classes. We run, there is a SolidWorks CAD that's being used out of there. There's been some other discussions about other classes that we can bring in, but those computers are the key, that because they're so powerful, we don't have to worry about whether we can run it, or do we have, upgrades that we have to do. Someday that'll happen. In 5 or 6 years, those computers will no longer be top of the line, but they've opened up doors for us that we haven't had before. And I think districts, when they're making those investments, have to ask that question: what else can I leverage out of this lab to really make this as big of a program or as comprehensive a program as I can?
Yeah, and to jump off, I use After Effects for my regular sports streaming, rendering different opening sequences and whatnot. And on my first gaming laptop, which only had a 1060 in it, was an i7, a 30-second render could take 15, 20 minutes. On these PCs, it will get done almost real time, probably 45 seconds. You know, and if you're thinking about doing the class, just how much more work you can get done in an hour and a half class.
Pat, what are things looking like in Tucson?
So, I have an interesting story. So we're piloting this. There's no other school, at middle school, doing anything like this. Our computers do not even meet the minimum standards, recommendations, for example, to play Rocket League, at a competitive level. Yet we have one team, that was good enough to make the playoffs with that equipment. So I don't want anyone to rule out that they don't have a chance with what they have and not even try. You can still try, and I believe that this group is going to demonstrate to this district what's possible, and it's going to get more buy-in from the administration if that's what you're looking for, from the leadership, the other schools, and whatnot. So we're pretty proud of what we've done. Our computers have embedded graphic cards in the chips, and they play at under 60 frames per second. So if you know what that means, it means like they're seeing their gameplay a little bit choppy compared to a modern, say, Xbox or a PlayStation. We're like a whole generation behind with the technology that we have, but we're going to try to change that, especially with what the students accomplished this year.
I'd like to jump to, and maybe I can get Pat's opinion on this as well. But the other thing I think that's worth talking about for a minute is the bandwidth required for a lab, because that's the other side of it. You can have really awesome PCs, but if your bandwidth pipe is very small, you don't have a lot of bandwidth, you could run into some issues. We have had some discussions about how we give certain priorities to certain things on the network, and what we've done at Griswold is, Kyle can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the number one thing that we have on our network is the telephone system, because if somebody has to dial for an emergency call, that's obviously priority. The second thing, though, on that list, really high up there, is the Nexus. So we have a lot of bandwidth associated with those computers. And even if, again, we had high-level computers, but the bandwidth wasn't there, that's an issue that you have to deal with. So we have 500 meg up, 500 meg down. Kyle can explain a little bit more about that than I can, but it's been more than adequate for what we've been doing so far, including things like recording video from OBS offline, because we do that to Google Drive rather than keep it on local network computers to save on space, because we would run out of space within hours without having that. And ask me how I know. We found that out the hard way when we first started. So, but if you're going to start doing a lot of that type of recording or streaming, you know, check bandwidth. But if Kyle wants to jump in on that one, I think he can fill in too.
Yeah, we have a 500 meg fiber pipe from our state network, which will burst up to a gig if we need be. And I found this funny because initially I was really watching our real-time data logs to see what was happening. And during gameplay, maybe our average use is somewhere around 200, 300 megs at any given time in district. During gameplay, that might bump up to 400. It's when the games are updating that I see a spike up to that gig. And I was like, I didn't expect that to be the way it was. And then in terms of recording, Jim was right. His first class of doing video recordings, he ate up almost 60 gigabytes within 40 minutes. I'm like, called him and said, you need to stop. We got to figure something else out, or our student drives are going to run out of disk space. And that's when we came up with the idea of just using the drive stream to Google Drive. And we don't see any lag from doing it. So that's a work, and it doesn't really tie up our bandwidth that much either.
Pat?
I was just going to add that
sure.
our computers are like 7 years old at our school. The ones that we purchased 7 years ago, they have like an i5 and a 1060 in there, and the kids still use them to compete right now. So I mean, every game that's out, they can still participate. So I don't think you have to go out and buy like these massive machines. I mean, it's awesome that Jim and Kyle have access to those, but you don't need that high caliber of a machine right now. Now games evolve, so you may have to update and update your equipment. But
I definitely think our esports does not use the horsepower what we have. It's for everything else that room's used for.
Yeah.
So all I was gonna add to that was that, ideally, if we could have a private MPLS network, which means we could control our bandwidth privately, nobody can use that traffic, and we were hooked up with VoIP, which is the voice over the internet. And we had layer 3 switches that could, generate all that traffic. That is perfectly ideal. That's what I would want in the business world, and something that would be ideal for any school. And depending, I don't know who how big the districts are for the audience that's involved, but there's also other workarounds. So if it's just like a very small school, there's a possibility maybe you can get separate internet just for that, let's say the computer lab, so it doesn't even touch the other part of the network. Of course, you'd want some IT person still monitoring that, some type of firewall, some type of security, but there's definitely different workarounds. Right now, we're under one network. I believe we do have layer 3 capability, and I was told that our traffic would be prioritized when we're gaming. And we have, I know we're on fiber, so we have a lot of internet, but I don't know exactly, haven't been told quite yet how much that is.
We have a great question from Stephen that I want to get to, but before we move away from this topic of computers and what kind of computers we need, I know this because we were talking about this before the webinar started. What type of memory do these computers need?
Well, for our spec, our computers came with a 500 gig hard drive, and as kids, especially in gym classes, not to call you out, Jim, but they are installing every game under the sun. And nowadays, a small game is 20, 30 gigs. Average is 80. So you install 10 people, try to install 10 games, and that hard drive is used up. So we're upgrading. I'm doing it next week during our spring break, updating. We got 2 terabyte drives put in just to help alleviate that problem. So as Jim says, they're not fighting each other. One class uninstalling what the class before just did. That's been our biggest monkey wrench that we didn't really think about initially. That we didn't think that would happen, but you get a group of 50 different kids, they want 50 different games.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, I was just gonna say too, you can go a couple different ways with that. We could have restricted how many games that they can put on the computers. I tried not to do that
Not
because I really
easily.
wanted them to be able to do, yeah, I know. I wanted them to be able to do what they wanted, within reason, within district guidelines of what's acceptable and what's not, but I wanted to give them that opportunity. But yeah, it was painfully apparent very quickly that the hard drive space wasn't enough. So if somebody's, thinking about what they're going to buy or what kind of space you need, one trick that we did have, like we said before, if you're going to do any recording with OBS, or you're going to be for open broadcaster software, if you're going to do any of that, you can use Google Drive as a off-site storage that you're not going to need, hard drive space for. But I wouldn't go with anything less than a terabyte. Now that we know what we know, I certainly would want that extra space, and by having the 2.5 terabytes total will be completely fine. On the other side, for memory too, for how much RAM you need. I mean, generally speaking, 16 gigs of RAM will be fine for esports. But if you're looking again for those higher end applications like, CAD and animation, 32 gigs really is a worthwhile investment per machine. And I think it future proofs it for quite a while too.
Michael, you were going to
Thank-
add?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add before we move on, because I do think Steven's question is good and I would like to get to it. First of all, just as you're making these decisions, I put from our help site a link to the PC system requirements for all the games we're currently running, just so you can kind of get an idea of like what the minimum requirements are. But like Pat said, if you're a little under those, most of the times the games will still run. They just may not run at like peak performance. One thing somebody touched on, you guys have been touching on a lot, is using the computers for more than just esports. If you're thinking about trying to secure funding for your program, that is a good way to do it as well. Say we're not just using these computers just for esports, because that might get shut down. But if you're saying, look at all the opportunities you can do for things like 3D animation, CAD, and that sort of thing, suddenly you're unlocking all these different STEM opportunities for your students. Just to make sure they're Windows so you can run all the games, not Mac. But one other thing, just from like the service perspective, that we've advised many districts on like what equipment they should be buying. sometimes people are tempted to get really high-end 4K monitors. That is not necessary. Not necessary. Maybe if you're doing, video animation where you need to render things in 4K, but if you're thinking about it from the esports perspective, a high-end 4K monitor will be way more expensive than a 1080p monitor that has a higher refresh rate. And your kids that are really serious about esports, the refresh rate is the frame rate. That's what Pat was talking about. It's just basically the movement is more one-to-one between your hand on the mouse and what you're seeing on the screen. A higher refresh rate is what those kids will want. And in fact, some kids will come in and turn all the graphics down to low settings anyway, so they can get a higher frame rate. So if you're doing it just for esports, I would just say, think about getting a lower resolution monitor, just a 1080p monitor with a really high refresh rate, like 120 or 144 hertz, which will still be cheaper than a 4K monitor. But I just wanted to go down that road before we stop talking about equipment, because I've seen that several times, actually. They're like, look at this build. Does this work? And I'm like, yeah, but you're spending like $300 too much on your monitors, and that could save you a bunch of money. So
Michael, can you tell us like what's the range that you're seeing? Because you do talk to so many schools around the United States for your monitor, your computer, your mouse, all of your stuff. What's the
yeah,
range we're looking at?
prices of PCs and just like tech in general have gone up. I think we had what am I trying to say? Production was low for a while, so the price of everything went up, and it's been hard to bring it back down. So I would have said 2 years ago that you could build a whole PC setup that would be good for gaming for a couple of years with $1,000, but you're looking probably more at like 1,200 for something that's pretty low end, but could last you a few years. 1,200 per setup, and that's just me being realistic. That's just where the prices have gone.
It was
And
funny.
go ahead. I was going to refer to you anyway. So
when we built this, we were looking. It's not quite 2 years ago that we were actually trying to source all this, and I was initially thinking, price the parts, build the PCs ourselves so we can get exactly what we want. And when I was looking at, video cards were insanely pricey. Probably about $2,800 to get the same equivalent of what we have for hardware that we got for the Dell gaming machines, and they cost us just under $2,000 for that. We've got 24-inch, 300 hertz refresh rates, and a generic Red Dragon gaming PC and the gaming mouse. So just under $2,000 for all of that, which is expensive, but for what we got, I don't think it's that atrocious. I would have thought building it out by parts would have been cheaper, but not the case anymore.
And then the other thing, do any of you use gaming laptops? And the only reason I bring this up is because ESSER funds, for the portable devices. What are your thoughts on the gaming laptops?
I can just kind of chime in with my experience as far as it's not with the gaming part, but just with the longevity. Usually mobile devices have a shorter lifespan, and in the business world, I mean, ideally you'd want to refresh your laptop every 2 years or so. They get drop bumped and all of that stuff pretty easily. I would want a PC, but there might be good reasons to have the laptop if you need your esports team to be mobile or whatnot. So I'm not saying don't do it. I just avoid it for that reason. And the other would be it's hard to upgrade. So like Mike's 7-year-old computer that he has, he still might be able to buy some new graphics card and still, keep him running another couple of years, or who knows. But that's just my take.
And so the question to follow up here is, Austin said, do you think it's not as cost effective to build out by parts anymore?
I think it just depends on what you want to put in it. I mean, the video card is buying a video card on its own. I mean, back when Kyle was talking about when they were buying their stuff, I could almost buy a PC with a video card in it and almost go resell the video card and make just as much as I would have on the PC. So, I mean, those video cards are just getting super expensive. So it just depends on what you put in it. But I mean, the rest of it's pretty reasonable, but the video cards are probably the priciest piece of it besides the CPU. So
When we're looking at the 3060 card that we got in these machines was $1,400 itself.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a different world than it was even a few years ago. Because right now, specifically video cards, the prices are just like gouged right now. And there are companies out there that are doing pre-builts with pretty decent video cards, and maybe not these amazing ones, where you can get everything for basically the same price as like a high-end video card. Got another question from Austin. I'm more of a console gamer myself, so I'll let somebody else answer that very specific video card question that Austin just asked.
I think that for the games I'm playing at the middle school level, the 360 that's going to be pushing graphics on a 1080p at the fastest frame rate, that 360 is going to do exactly what that 490 is going to do. That 490 might push a couple frames a second more for something like Rocket League. That's going to be the highest intense game that I'm playing. So that's what the 360, what the 490 could do is maybe play these new games that are out there that we're not playing in middle school for competitive esports, if that makes sense. So I would choose a 690 for budget reasons, and it would get the job done, in my opinion. I'm thinking that Rocket League's going to update their graphics someday, and maybe it'll be called Rocket League 2, but I'm sure they're going to make it so that it's going to last as well, even with modern graphic cards. Again, that's just my opinion.
I have a feeling that this is a webinar all by itself. Just what computers do you need? So I'm going to move us on just a little bit and get back to Steven's question. Can you talk about updating the games? Is there any automation available, or is it manual per device?
I was complaining about this earlier. I've looked at everything to do to try to push out installs and update, but because the games install through the individual like Epic Games or Riot Games, you have to have that running to actually get the game to install. And I have not figured out any way to automate. The closest I came, and I can't afford the solution, is a company, GG Circuit, or I think in their product is GG Rock, which is basically you boot your PCs from a network server. So you have, every time you reboot it, it's back to the pristine image, and you install your updates onto that as you go. But I would love if anybody has an idea of how to automatically install and update games, because that right now is my holy grail.
And the way we've been handling it in class, because of that reality, is if we're doing a gaming concepts class, a lot of students will start their game and begin updating while we're doing work. And I'm totally fine with that. I know some teachers may say, well, you're gaming while we're doing work. If it's running in the background and you're just updating, I'm okay with that. And then at the start of a practice or a game day, you have to make sure that you build in enough time so that those updates can be done pretty much at any moment. If you are on a game day in particular, you want to make sure that you've got plenty of time before you start to do those updates. I've seen a couple of teams that get into a situation where they start, 5 minutes before cue, and then they queue in, and then it's like, oh yeah, we have 25 minutes of updates to get ready for the match, and that can be a real problem. So, but Kyle's right. We've experimented with it. We haven't found anything that can automate it, but it's hopefully somebody will solve that problem. I think that would be a huge, huge in the esports world to fix that issue.
something that we did, and I've heard other schools do, is we had an intern with our tech department who would have access to update, like they were a student, but they went through the qualifications of, we trust this kid, and they would go through, and one of their duties, like every Tuesday, is to update Blizzard. All the Blizzard games update on Tuesday, so that was their job, was to go in there and update all the computers. So that's one solution. Of course, you need to trust this person, so you want to make sure, double check that they're not, keep track of them, because they are a student sometimes. So I would say that's one option I'd just throw out.
Okay, and I'm going to touch on this because I don't know. I know this is a hot topic, but I'm not sure how many people on the call do this. So I'm just going to touch on it and see if anyone has any other questions. How do you connect the Nintendo Switch to the internet? We're told by educators that the Switch is the most annoying one for IT departments.
I've heard that, and I didn't do anything to our network other than what I did for regular esports. And Jim had some kids just bring them in, and I said, well, why do you do that? Because it's not going to work. And he said they were on fine. So I honestly don't know what I opened up that allowed it.
because we had expected major issues, and there were none, and I was stunned. But yeah, the what we did to open up the games for normal esports use, I'm not sure if there were ports that were overlapped or what the story was, but Kyle's right. We thought that was going to be a nightmare, and for us it wasn't. You know, again, I'm not saying that other schools haven't had nightmare situations. They probably have, but we can't say that we've had major issues.
But that scared and bummed me
Kyle-
because I'm like, what do I got open?
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, Kyle. Oh dear.
Yeah. Kyle and Jim, I wonder if there's something you already had set up that was like open enough that the switch was just like, oh, this feels nice,
Mhm.
you know?
Right.
Because I just from the service perspective, talking to coaches, we've had some coaches that have had a lot of trouble. And I've really gotten in the weeds a little bit with this. And so here's just, I'm gonna try to say this really quickly. We suggest that you use an Ethernet connection instead of Wi-Fi for Switch, especially if you're playing a game like Super Smash Brothers, because fighting games really want that really high refresh rate there. And the way the Switch does it is you have to have a converter for an Ethernet port, and that has its own IP address. So suddenly you're opening it up for two things. So that's where it can get kind of complicated. The other thing is specifically Super Smash Brothers. It is what's it called? It's a user-to-user connection. There's a better name for it than what I'm
Peer.
saying. Peer-to-peer connection versus a dedicated server, and that can scare schools as well. Like I don't want to allow a peer-to-peer connection. So that's something you have to consider if you're specifically playing Super Smash Brothers. With games like Splatoon and Mario Kart, those are going to a dedicated server, so that's a little bit less scary. But Super Smash Brothers is a peer-to-peer connection, and that can scare people sometimes. So keeping those things in mind, just be ready to open up ports for basically two things per switch, and be able to open up a port for a peer-to-peer connection.
Speaking of the Switch and the issues that they have, we have someone that Chris Cummins said we have Switch issues to the point that our student plays from home. And that was actually something, do you allow your students to play at home? What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks to doing that?
So I can add to that. So we did have a student play from home. He just wasn't able to make it for financial reasons and whatnot. So parents had to work. He didn't have transportation. He was able to play from home, and it was an experiment for us. Again, we're new to this year, and we found that as a potential benefit and opportunity. We saw the glass half full there. This student who couldn't participate was playing with his team from home. And so in theory, a student who's out for whatever reason, they're sick, they will say COVID, maybe they can still participate, be part of the school, be part of that school community. And that's what we really want from our esports program, is that sense of belonging. The caveat for us is that, like I was telling the group earlier, our equipment is below standard. So this student might have equipment at home that's better and say, hey, mister, I want to play from home because I can have a better chance at winning. And how am I going to say no to that? So those are some things that we want to figure out. But in regards to the Switch, we do some training here in the classroom. The switches do work offline. And so the athletes can compete and practice in a lab offline with no problems. And the idea is that we can train them to log in and use their digital citizenship skills that we're teaching them and log into the dashboard from home and compete. Smash Bros right now is a 1v1 type of game. They don't need their whole team to compete in that. And so those are things that we're exploring and considering.
Okay, we're coming down to the last 9 minutes. And so please get your questions into the chat. I do have one that I know is a burning question. It is Discord. And it's a hot topic in schools and for administrators. I don't love Discord in schools. And so do you guys use it? In what way? If you don't, what do you use? Help administrators and help teachers with Discord.
So oh, go ahead, Pat. Do you want to start?
Oh, I was, yes, mine's short. I can't help there. We don't allow it.
So what do you use, Pat? Do you?
They use proximity. The students sit next to each other and play as a team.
Got it.
So yes, we do allow it. And I understand it is controversial. But just give me a couple minutes to explain how we do this, because I think there's a lot of, people don't really understand, I think, what it is and how it works, and that can create a lot of anxiety. So Discord is a communications platform, and it runs off of having a number of servers, each server being independent of each other. So I can run my own server, you can run your server, and I can join yours, and you can come into mine. And there's ways that you can communicate through text, you can communicate through video, through graphics, through sound. And it's a very powerful tool when it's used properly. All right, but that's the key. It's got to be used properly. So we have a Discord server that has been approved by our district. It is fully locked down. We do not allow anybody into it that's not part of the team or not affiliated with our school district. We have a number of adults that are in it. There are 4 admins in total, myself and Kyle. Kyle's actually the owner of the Discord. I'm also an admin, and we have 2 very responsible students who've been handpicked that also help us with managing the Discord server and making sure that it stays, stays appropriate. I think the key when you're using it is that it is a communication tool. Like I have my headset on now. If you're in a match, a lot of times it's hard to talk to other people, particularly if you have one person playing from home. If you, like you said before, if they're on COVID, one person's home, to be able to communicate, you've got to be able to have both the sound coming in from the game and then listening to what everybody else is saying. So my team, when we're playing Valorant per se, they'll have their headsets on, mic'd in, and they'll be able to chat with one another seamlessly as the game's going in progress using a Discord channel, a voice channel inside of Discord. And we use multiple channels for different purposes. I have an Overwatch team channel, a Valorant team channel, and so on. We have definite meetings with the students when we start the season, and we explain that this is not a toy, and all of the normal rules of school apply. This is not to be used inappropriately. This is not something that's to be used, for fun, to make fun of somebody, I should say. But it is used for appropriate purposes, and we have used it. Like last summer, we designed our esports jersey using Discord. We were posting all the different ideas that we had, and everybody was, commenting. We had our vote over Discord, so it definitely worked on that front. One thing to know, and that is something that you just can't get around, is that you can send private messages person to person, and I frown heavily on that. I like to have everything done in the open modded Discord server itself. But you can't control what is sent student to student or person to person outside of Discord, nor can you control what happens in other servers that you don't control. So if a student decides to join another Discord server that's, completely independent of our schools, I don't see and I can't control anything that goes on over there. I can't monitor any of that. So I think it's a powerful tool when used appropriately, but it needs to be under strict supervision. And I do think that there need to be some very clear guidelines that are set with students and parents about what it is and what it is not. But my district's fully on board with it. We have not, knock on something as I say this, but we have not really had any issues per se. I've had to bring conversations back on the rails a couple times, but nothing that's ever gotten so far off the rails that it's been a serious issue. And I do think that it can be a very good tool for the camaraderie and the communication, if you will, of team members, but not something to be used openly, not for people to invite their friends. All of that we have completely shut off. It is only a handful of people that control what our Discord server can do and who's in at any given time.
Bradford. Oh, go ahead.
Jim, I'd like to just say thanks for enlightening me about that. I think that because, for example, the kid that did stay home, he did have to use the cell phone. And those are issues that we do want to mitigate and solve. And so hopefully in the future, we can become more advanced in that way, as well as we try to figure out what the risks are and stuff like that. Thank you.
You're welcome. No problem.
Bradford's asking the follow-up question about Discord. How is your Discord not school affiliated, but the school can use it? What are the rules for that?
So Discord is not used for gaming concepts during the school day. It's only used for the esports team after hours, right? So to be part of our Discord is to participate in the team and then to make the choice that you're going to be a part of it. Parents are fully aware when they sign the permission slip that we do have a Discord server, and I keep a record of the names that are in it, who each person is, and what they do. As far as not school affiliated, it's like any other social media service. You know, our school has a Facebook page. Our school has Twitter, and those platforms can send private messages from person to person behind the scenes. There's nothing stopping that from happening on those either. But the difference is that those tend to be more public, for lack of a better way to say it, where the school has a presence. The Discord server is, you know, at least in our case, only for those students that are involved in our server for our team for that purpose. But again, I want to be clear that Discord server is only for our team, and I can only monitor and regulate what goes on inside the server. I can't regulate anything else that goes on with private messaging, etc. But it's the same on Twitter. You know, if we have a student that subscribes to our principal's Twitter feed, you know, theoretically that student now could message other people on Twitter. She can't stop that, but you can keep up with everything that she's saying in real time as she posts to her feed. So again, it's social media, you know, it is. And I think personally, I think teaching the responsible use and the monitoring of that use is critical, because it isn't a tool that, you know, is to be taken lightly. But if we just try to ban it and say it doesn't exist and we're not going to allow it, that doesn't necessarily promote, you know, appropriate use of it and understanding how it's used either. I'll go you one better. Most college teams, or all college teams that I'm aware of, use Discord for their esports teams. And so if a team doesn't have that, there's nothing wrong with that inherently. But when you get to that college level, some of those students have never had exposure to it before and don't really know how it works or would be able to compete at that level to do that. So just something else to consider. But again, at our middle school, it would definitely not be allowed. Period. End of story. That would not be something that would be used. But for the high school level, under appropriate guidance, it is considered acceptable.
And again, going back to our initial conversation, firewall rules only allow Discord happening when our esports team is in session.
Right.
That's how my district did it too. I know we're like basically out of time. But when I was still teaching, my students were able to convince our district people to only allow Discord for esports. And that's because they did it. They asked for it, not me. And students' voices can do that sometimes. But yeah, so that's an option as well. As don't open it up to the whole school, but let the esports kids use it to keep it a little bit more restricted. I know we're out of time, so that's all I'll say.
Well, I was just going to ask if our panelists, thank you so much. If you guys would be open to putting your contact information in the chat in case there are any follow-up questions. We will be posting all but the first 10 minutes, which I forgot to record, of this webinar on our Gaming Concepts YouTube page. So you will be able to pass this on. I can see our panelists starting to put their emails and contact information in the chat. We appreciate everyone that has joined us today, and we hope you can catch our next Gaming Concepts webinar. It is parents of gamers, so that will be exciting. Jim, Kyle, Pat, thank you guys so much for joining us as experts today. Mike and Michael, thank you guys so much for always being supportive and moving the conversation forward, because I could have got way over my head on this one. Once again, thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.